No sirens, no neighbors, no second chances. When night fell across the wild frontier, families braced for their most fragile hours. Darkness was not just a blanket, it was a doorway for danger. Predators, both beast and man, crept under cover of night. A bear could smash through log walls like paper. A pack of wolves could encircle a home, waiting for weakness. Raiders could come without warning, leaving behind ruin and silence. In those hours, while sleep made families vulnerable, they relied on protection systems built from instinct, ingenuity, and desperation. They needed ways to detect threats before they breached the homestead. They needed defenses made from what they had: wood, wire, livestock, and grit. Because on the frontier, a single mistake could cost everything. One forgotten barrier, one missed sound, one unguarded door, and by morning, a family could wake to blood, theft, or never wake again. The families who endured in the harshest, most lawless regions didn't just survive, they engineered protection systems that rival some of today's security tech. Strategies built from ancestral knowledge, sharpened through generations of trial and tragedy. But how did they sense danger in pitch-black wilderness? What homemade defenses turned back raiders and prowling beasts? How did simple hands with simple tools build fortresses that stood for generations? This is the story of the night defenses of frontier families, of their vigilance, their creativity, and their quiet war against the dark. Perimeter defense and early warning systems. First line of protection, 1,750 to 1,800. Out on the edge of civilization, time was the greatest weapon. The longer a family had to prepare, the better their odds. So the first layer of frontier defense wasn't a wall or a gun. It was awareness. Families learned to build a perimeter that could see what they couldn't. Systems turned trees and animals into sentinels and transformed silence into signal. Dried gourds packed with pebbles hung from low branches or fences, ready to rattle at the slightest nudge. Strings of tin cans acted as clanging alarms. These makeshift traps, though humble, worked with eerie efficiency. Dogs were more than pets. They were early warning systems trained to bark in different tones for different threats. Geese shrieked at strange movements, and even chickens could serve as motion sensors when placed properly. Tripwires strung between posts or stumps caught at the ankles and triggered sudden bursts of noise, metal clanking, or wood snapping. These traps didn't aim to wound. They were designed to warn. Sight lines mattered. Brush and timber were cleared in wide rings around cabins, opening vast fields of fire. Every cleared yard bought more time in a fight. Within these open spaces, every movement was visible, every shadow suspect. Night watch rotations ensured someone was always awake, ready to sound the alarm. Sleep came in shifts, and every shift had its protocol: when to raise the family, where to go, how to arm. Signal codes developed over time. Blasts from horns, the sudden flare of a torch, even reflected moonlight from a piece of mirror. Each one meant something urgent. A threat spotted, danger incoming, or worse, all was already lost. Concealment was its own kind of defense. Many homesteads were deliberately built out of sight, tucked in valleys or behind rises, camouflaged from the road. Smoke was drawn low and light was scarce. Some cabins seemed to vanish from view, even just a mile away. Misdirection worked in tandem with these tactics. Families sometimes lit false fires in the woods, built dummy cabins, or left misleading footprints to draw attackers off course. In winter, tracks gave away everything. In spring, it was birdsong, or rather, the silence after a sudden flight that gave warnings. Reading the environment became as vital as reading a map. Information passed quietly but quickly. Travelers and neighbors shared what they knew. where the raiders were last seen, which predator had been hunting livestock, which trails had gone cold. Every fragment of intelligence shaped the next night's defense, and nothing stayed safe without upkeep. Alarms frayed, sentry animals aged, and traps wore out. Families tested their systems like soldiers drilled for battle, because the night always came, and it always came hungry. By 1800, across the rugged frontiers of America, families had carved circles of awareness into the dark. They had built systems not just to warn, but to buy time. Time to wake, time to arm, time to survive. Physical barriers and fortification, building impenetrable defenses, 1800 to 1850. Once danger was known, the fight became about delay. The second layer of defense, the one built of sweat, wood, and stone, was made to hold. Cabins weren't just homes. They were fortresses. Logs were chosen thick, stacked tight, and chinked with clay and moss to seal every gap. The walls could absorb a musket ball. Windows were small slits, placed high enough to keep out intruders, but low enough to fire from within. Doors were the true front line, reinforced with iron hinges, wooden crossbars, and heavy bolts. One look at the structure told a story. This place would not fall easy. Around these cabins rose fences, but not the kind meant to keep livestock in. These were palisades, rows of sharpened logs driven deep into the earth and lashed together. They stood like wooden spears, forming a barrier that predators, whether four-legged or two, couldn't cross without effort. Gates were few and heavily secured. The idea was simple. Control the entry points, and you control the battle. But not every defense was above ground. Root cellars and hidden chambers doubled as hideouts. Underground tunnels linked buildings or led to escape routes deep into the woods. In more than one raid, these hidden pathways turned slaughter into survival. Every approach to the home was engineered. Fallen trees, trenches, thorn bushes, all placed with care to slow an advance and funnel it, where defenders had the advantage. These kill zones, as grim as they sound, gave families control over where the enemy would stand when the shooting began. Inside the defenses, supplies were secured. Wells were dug within the perimeter or connected to cabins by covered walkways. Water barrels were hidden beneath floorboards. Food stores were kept in sealed chambers high and dry. Because siege wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. Livestock, too, were brought close. Pens were built within the fences, and animals were herded in at dusk. They were food, warning systems, and sometimes the reason a family lived through the winter. Raiders often came for the stock. Protecting them meant protecting everything. Workshops and tool sheds were likewise placed behind defenses. Blacksmith tools, axes, spare parts, all essential to daily life, were protected like weapons. And weapons were everywhere. Hidden compartments inside cabins held rifles, knives, powder, shot. Nothing was left exposed. Nothing was left to luck. The greatest threat to these wooden worlds wasn't always men or beasts, it was fire. One lit torch tossed over a fence could undo everything. So families stored buckets of water, barrels of sand, and fire beaters in reach. Chimneys were cleaned. Sparks were watched. Even raiders knew. If you couldn't breach the wall, you could try to burn it down. Defenses had to change with time. A growing family meant expanding barriers. New threats meant new tactics. So everything was built to adapt. Fences could be extended, watchtowers added. What began as a cabin might become a compound. Even deception had its place. Some families disguised their strongest walls. A plain log might hide a murder hole. A low fence might be backed by a ditch. Raiders, misjudging what they saw, often paid the price. But wood rots, nails pull free. Storms break walls. so repairs were constant. Every week brought inspections. Every attack, whether real or imagined, taught new lessons. By 1850, many frontier homes had become fortresses in function, not just in form. They stood as proof that with hand tools and hard work, families could carve safety from wilderness. They couldn't stop the danger, but they could meet it eye to eye and hold the line. Weapons and combat readiness. Preparing for the final stand, 1850 to 1875. When warnings failed and walls were breached, it came down to weapons and the will to use them. The third layer of defense was personal, brutal, and final. This was the last stand. Firearms were the great equalizer. Long rifles offered precision and distance, shotguns scattered lead wide and cruel at close range, and pistols filled the gaps in between. A frontier family didn't just own guns, they relied on them like breath. Every rifle had a name, every scratch had a story. These tools were handed down, maintained with reverence, and passed through generations like heirlooms of survival. But ammunition was gold. Frontier families couldn't waste a shot. They collected lead, cast their own bullets, saved every grain of powder. Reloading wasn't just practical. It was ritual. Hidden caches ensured that even if the main stores were lost, a fight could still be fought. Inside the cabin, every approach was covered. Guns rested by doors, beneath beds, and above mantels. Strategic points, windows, crawl spaces, lofts, were armed and ready. It was a house of weapons, disguised as a home. Training began young. Children learned to shoot before they could write. Marksmanship was a necessity, not a skill. Every shot practiced was one closer to staying alive. They practiced under stress, in low light, in silence, because when the time came, there would be no calm, no clarity, only chaos. And when the guns ran dry or the enemy came too close, hand-to-hand combat followed. Hatchets, knives, farm tools turned to battlefield steel. The will to survive often outmatched skill. Teeth gritted, blood spilled, no hesitation. Fighting wasn't a solo act. It was choreographed. Families trained in teams. Roles were assigned. Who covered the doors, who guarded the children, who moved supplies. In the heat of a raid, that coordination saved lives. Psychological strength played its part. A reputation for fierce resistance could stop some raids before they started. Stories of one family standing their ground spread quickly. Raiders sought easy prey, not fighters. Crisis plans were drawn like war maps, evacuation routes, rally points, silent signals. Every type of threat had a response, rehearsed until it became instinct. Weapons were kept hidden, but reachable. A drawer that opened two ways, a false bottom in the pantry. If a raider found one rifle, another waited unseen. But battle brings wounds, blood loss, infection, trauma. So medicine was part of defense. Bandages, tinctures, stitching kits. Mothers became field surgeons. Children learned to clean wounds and pray they didn't fester. And after the smoke cleared, there was still work to do. Rebuild walls, bury the dead, restock what was lost. Because a second attack could come at dawn. Survival didn't end with victory. It began there. By 1875, the frontier family was more than a settler. They were warriors in waiting, trained and armed for the worst. When every other line of defense failed, they became their own last hope, and sometimes their own legend. Psychological defense and community networks. Building unbreakable security, 1875 to 1900. By the final quarter of the 19th century, survival meant more than thick walls and steady aim. Families began to understand that the strongest defense wasn't built of logs or gunpowder. It was built of people, of reputation, of trust. On the frontier, a family known for fighting back was often spared from having to fight at all. Stories spread like wildfire. Tales of desperate stands and victorious defenses created reputations that echoed louder than a rifle shot. Raiders preferred easy targets. A household known for fierce retaliation became a shadow fortress, defended as much by fear as by timber. But no family was an island. Neighbors became allies, their lives tied together by necessity. Mutual defense pacts were spoken, sometimes sealed in handshakes, sometimes in blood. Signal fires on the ridge, horn calls across the valley. One family's alarm could summon a dozen rifles in minutes. Together, scattered homesteads became a network of watchful eyes and ready hands. Intelligence flowed like water across these communities. Travelers brought warnings, traders shared whispers of raiders on the move. Families listened, adapted, and prepared. Information was as vital as bullets and just as carefully guarded. Deception played its part as well. False walls, decoy camps, misleading trails, all weapons in the psychological battlefield. A raider who believed a family was stronger than it truly was often turned back without testing the truth. And when conflict threatened but hadn't yet broken into violence, diplomacy was the sharpest weapon. Negotiation, compromise, and careful words saved lives where bullets might have ended them. Many families survived not by winning fights, but by avoiding them altogether. Trade added another layer of protection. A neighbor who relied on your goods or a trader who depended on your business had reason to keep you safe. Economics built bonds that bullets couldn't break. Acceptance into the local community mattered too. Families who integrated into cultural and social networks found safety in belonging. Outsiders stood alone, insiders stood together. As time wore on, rough forms of justice began to take shape. Community councils, traveling judges. The threat of punishment for raiding or theft slowly replaced the endless cycle of vengeance. The law was fragile, but it was growing, and with it came a sense of order. Knowledge was passed from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor. Defensive tactics, watch routines, medical skills all became part of the shared inheritance of survival. Families taught, neighbors learned, and together they grew stronger. The frontier was never static. Threats shifted, dangers evolved, so defenses had to evolve too. Adaptation was the only constant. Communities that changed with the times endured. Those that didn't vanished. At the center of it all stood leaders, respected voices who could rally neighbors, direct defenses, and settle disputes. Leadership turned scattered cabins into communities and fear into resolve. Security was never about the strength of your wall, wrote chronicler Samuel Mackenzie in 1887. It was about the strength of your community, the wisdom of your preparations, and the determination of your family to survive whatever the darkness brought. A family who worked with their neighbors could rest easier even in the wildest country. A family who stood alone rarely lasted long, and so the last frontier defenses were not built from wood or steel, but from unity, memory, and will. They were proof that survival was never a solitary struggle. It was a shared one. The lessons of those long nights on the frontier echo into our own time. Their defenses were made of timber and stone, of courage and cunning, but also of something timeless, the human will to endure. These families faced the wilderness with no backup, no safety net, and yet they forged systems of survival that remain remarkable even now. They remind us that security is never just about walls or weapons. It is about foresight. It is about discipline. It is about standing shoulder to shoulder with those you trust and refusing to surrender to fear. And maybe in their struggles, there is a lesson for us today. That even in a world filled with modern alarms, digital locks, and instant communication, true security still comes from preparation, from resilience, from unity. So when you hear the stories of frontier families, when you imagine the gourd rattling in the night wind, the watchful eyes staring into the black, the whispered signals across the valley, remember what they were really defending. Not just cabins, not just supplies, but futures, generations, hope. Their world is gone, but their lessons remain. If you've enjoyed stepping back into the wilderness with us, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who love history's untold stories, and subscribe for more journeys into the grit and glory of the past. Your support keeps these stories alive and ensures that the voices of those who endured the dark will never be forgotten. Until next time, stay prepared, stay resilient, and remember, the frontier never truly ended. It just lives on in us.